Good evening. Welcome to Design United's first reading room, in conversation with the author Charmaine Chan of the book in spotlight, Courtyard Living, Contemporary Houses of the Asia Pacific, published by Thames Hudson, October 2019. I'm Varna Shashidhar, founder principal of a regional landscape practice, BSLA, based in Bengaluru. I'm supported by Claywork Spaces in this endeavor. Socially distanced world, Design United is an optimistic digital platform for collaborative design and connection. Design United was created in March 2020 during a period of intense lockdown and quarantine measures within the region. The aim behind Design United was to create an optimistic space for regional dialogue, connections, collaborations, and opportunities for young regional designers and design practices. A much needed network of support and peer mentorship during these uncertain times. Talented young designers and design studios working on design innovation with an approach that is relevant to our South Asian region have been invited to be a part of the platform. We also encourage design students from the region to share their work, be involved in the dialogue, and to be an active part of Design United. Design United, most of all, believes in creating a community of designers and design knowledge that is largely contextual, with focus on contributing to the environment and our community. Design United believes greatly in a spirit of collaboration and idea exchange. I'm supported by Claywork Spaces in this endeavor. I'm also supported by my very enthusiastic Design United team comprising of young designers and design students from the South Asian region. Design United believes that books cannot be replaced, and Design United's reading room provides a positive platform for a community of readers and design bibliophiles to interact with renowned authors, editors, designers of books relevant to our South Asian region. I'm indeed delighted to welcome design editor with South China Morning Post and the author of the wonderful book Courtyard Living, Contemporary Houses of the Asia Pacific, published by Thames Hudson, which we have in our reading room book spotlight for this month. The book features 25 recent courtyard houses from the Asia Pacific region. The author Charmaine believes that courtyard houses are a resilient typology that has existed and survived since antiquity. Courtyards are timeless in our South Asian region, in melding purpose and infusing beauty into everyday living. The author Charmaine Chan has enjoyed a career in journalism in Australia, Japan, and Hong Kong. She was the literary editor at the South China Morning Post before becoming the newspaper's design editor 15 years ago. We are so happy to welcome Charmaine to Reading Room. I would like to request Charmaine to share her work. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for sharing some of your Saturday with me. I'm delighted to be the first author to be presenting to Design United's Reading Room. And I was thinking, design and books are my life. And if there's one thing this pandemic has shown us, it's that books can survive. So let me get cracking and introduce to you my book, Courtyard Living, Contemporary Houses of the Asia Pacific. I'd like to talk about how this book came about, to show you some of the houses that I visited, and to try to explain why I included these houses in my book. As you just heard, I am the design editor at the South China Morning Post, where for more than 15 years I've been visiting people's homes and writing about residential design. And writing Courtyard Living allowed me to do that on a grander scale throughout the region. Some of you who may be familiar with Hong Kong will probably understand why there are no Hong Kong homes in my book. And that's mainly because real estate in Hong Kong remains among the most expensive in the world. And people here would rather use every inch of space for more storage, bigger rooms, bigger houses. And that's unfortunate, but perhaps in light of the pandemic, things may change. I'm hoping that architects and developers will be thinking about courtyards and other kinds of outdoor space to place in their low, medium, high rises so that we can have more humane and places. We can have homes that are, have wellness built into them. As Varna said, I included 25 houses in my book from across the region, including Australia, where I grew up and where the book had its start. I wanted to build a courtyard house in Sydney for many of the reasons that they remain popular today. And these reasons allowed me to organize the book and to form the chapters. As I like to do when I write about homes, I try to show how people live, and in this case, in and around courtyards. I also try to show how they interact with the great outdoors, be it behind glass, paved, furnished, even abstract. And I thought that I'd start with a home that I visited very early on. Let me just try to work out how to share my screen to show you this house. Here we go. Well, that's the cover. And I'm talking about this house, which is the only house in the book that made a concerted effort to look old. But I thought I would include it because it was a house that was just so much fun to be in. I visited over a very, very wet weekend and realized that that courtyard wasn't entirely practical because I needed to have an umbrella to go from room to room across that courtyard. So it was a little bit difficult, but that courtyard allowed in rain, which cooled the house. And when the sun came out, it really, the courtyard really came into its own. And here is what the house looked like. It has a metal veil across the front and over the top for security and also to train these creepers above and in front of the house. And there's the courtyard. And that courtyard is similar to the other courtyards in the book, in that it allowed in rain, but also light and air. It organized space. It afforded exposure to the sky, but in this case, total privacy. And it was an outdoor room, it was a communal space, and in this case, it also facilitated communication. So the architects in this project, they were very clever. And to get their clients to sign off on this project, they decided to go first to the children who would be living in this house. So they asked the kids what they wanted, and the kids basically said they wanted somewhere to play because this house is in one of Ho Chi Minh City's fast disappearing alleyways, nowhere near parks. And so the architects, hearing what the children had to say, gave them this, which was a net strung over the courtyard where the adults hung out. So in Ho Chi Minh City, as some of you may know, houses were taxed according to the street front widths of houses. So that's why you get these incredibly skinny, tall houses. And the architect himself grew up in one of these tall, skinny houses. And he knew how frustrating it was for his mother in particular, who tried to keep track of him during the day. And also when she wanted him down for dinner, she would have to call him using her phone. So this courtyard house really stuck in my mind. And when I went to another courtyard house, so that one's all about nostalgia, and this one was all about a new way of living in suburbia. This one was in Brisbane, Australia. And it worked for similar reasons because parents in this house told me that they felt a sense of liberation, being able to keep an eye on their children in that pool in the center of the house, from anywhere in the house. It was one of the most open houses I visited, just showing you what it looked like from the living room. And there was a drawback, according to the father, because he said that he was really quite worried about the amount of noise that the neighbors might hear, because you were able to talk to anyone from anywhere at any time. On the subject of Australia, I guess you heard me say that I started this book because I was thinking of building a courtyard house. And I guess I was trying to find books that would help me along the way. And I discovered that there was just nothing that would really help. There was a lot of academic writing on Balinese courtyard compounds and Spanish colonial houses, but nothing that really helped me. So I decided to plug the gap and write my own book. And one thing that was uppermost in my mind was how to also build a house to accommodate an extended family. And this was something that was important to another architect, actually several, whose works appear in this book. And this architect, whose house you're seeing, was a Taiwanese architect, a young fellow whose father owned the factory on which that courtyard house stands. So it's a stocking factory in Changhua in Taiwan. And the whole family used to live downstairs in amongst the factory behind the office. And they really just wanted something that was light and bright and had air, and they wanted to move up. So he decided to build his idea of a 21st century Chinese quadrangle house. And he wanted to be able to live there with his own small family, his two siblings, and their parents. So this is what he came up with. And it was interesting to me because unlike traditional Siheyuan quadrangle courtyard houses in Beijing, northern China, this one really did away with hierarchy. So in the past, you would have had the parents in the farthermost wing of the house because it was deemed the safest. In this house, the parents wanted to be right next to the entrance because that was where the dining room and kitchen were. And that's where all members of the family met every night for dinner. They led completely independent lives, but dinner and meeting once a day was very important to them. But one interesting thing he did was he put the living room in a cube in the center of the courtyard. And he explained this as his way of sort of getting through that contradiction in 21st century lifestyles, which is basically wanting more transparency, hence all that glass, but also privacy. So he put the living room in this cube, which was angled at 45 degrees to afford some privacy. And he also built on the perimeter of the factory this wall, which edited the views out because the factory was in an industrial area and the views weren't pretty. So this idea of editing out views was something that came up several times in the book. And again, in Bangkok, when I met the architects of this house, they were explaining that, this is in an industrial area, although it doesn't look like it. And the architects told me that what they gave their clients was a private sky. They put a courtyard in the middle of the house, which is where they grew black bamboo. And that entire area was kept wet all the time so that the lounge and the areas around it were very comfortable to be in. In fact, and this is Bangkok, the only room that they kept air conditioned some of the time was that family room beside the living room. And that's because that's where the baby slept. So from Bangkok, then I went to Malaysia, which is where I was born and where I spent 10 years of my life. This house is close to Kuala Lumpur, and everyone I know in Kuala Lumpur or from Kuala Lumpur has security concerns. So they always talk about burglars and just their feeling of vulnerability. And the owner of this house felt the same. So she wanted an inward-looking house. And she also wanted a house that adhered to very basic Vastu Shastra principles. So that courtyard in the middle of the house helped because there was no obstruction to the flow of positive energy. And she said she didn't want a house that was like everyone else in the neighborhood, where the house was in the middle of the plot and your front yard might as well have been for passers-by, and your backyard was just an afterthought. She wanted something different and she wanted to feel secure. So this sense of feeling vulnerable and wanting to feel safe in your own house came up quite sadly in the next house, which is in Jakarta. And it's in an enclave, Chinese enclave, that was very close to one of the flashpoints in the 1998 race riots that killed 1,000 people. And the owner told me that he wanted a house that he was able to entirely close on the front, but obviously he and his family still needed to be able to breathe inside. And that's what that courtyard allowed him to do. So it was a courtyard house that was like courtyard houses of the past that were built for defensive purposes. So as I was traveling around, talking to people about why they were still building courtyard houses, I met Anjalendran from Sri Lanka. I'm sure you are familiar with him. And he took me to this house that had just been finished several hours from Colombo. And he built it with a sliver of a courtyard, he said, for the then Minister of Law and Order. And as soon as I walked in, I realized that this house would have been used for a lot of meetings because there were a lot of chairs in the house. And I guess these meetings were held away from prying eyes. I didn't actually put this house in the book because I didn't get permission, but I also thought that I'd like to show it to you now because it's one of Anjalendran's courtyard houses, and he took me to his own house, which he uses and used for a lot of houses that he built for family and friends and also loyal staff. So you see a lot of these houses in Colombo are designed by Anjalendran. So as I was talking to Anjalendran, he made me realize that, this topic of courtyards and courtyard houses is simply vast. And I've only really dipped my toes into it. For this book, I looked at courtyard houses only in warm climates. And at the back of my mind, I thought, well, one day I might have the stamina to look at courtyards in cool or colder climates. And that's possibly when I might look at courtyard houses in places like Korea, Japan, China. While I was in Sri Lanka, I went to see this house, which is called Artist Studio, and it's by Linda Kanangara. And I loved this place because it really showed me how people could live very open lives truly connected with nature. It was a house that had no glass on the ground floor. And, I really wanted to show a low-cost house. I was really impressed that the owner rolled up his sleeves and helped to build his linear house, which had courtyards inserted on either side of the spine. And having the indoor areas flow directly outside saved on additional exterior wall surfaces, and it allowed this house to be built for not very much money, which, if you think about courtyard houses, some of them are more expensive than typical houses because you're having to deal with all these additional exterior wall surfaces. And I was talking to Anjalendran about this house, and he was very complimentary, and he said it's a beautiful house. He pointed out, though, that in the past, all courtyards were utilitarian in nature, but these days they are built solely for pleasure. And I guess that goes for all the houses in my book. And there was one that I wanted to show. Oh, that's the artist studio again. Sorry, I forgot to show it. It's one I wanted to show at the other end of the cost scale. And this house is in Singapore. And it reminded me of that Islamic notion of the courtyard as being paradise on earth. It's built around a large pool with a lounge in the middle of the pool. And the house also had a waterfall, a pond, a jacuzzi. There's a lot of moving water, which created negative ions, which I was told are meant to produce vitality and energy. And the whole point of turning this regular house into an extraordinary home was that the father didn't want his children or his children's children ever to leave home. So he built a version of paradise. And I wonder whether you can see that little slice of paradise in this good class bungalow area in Singapore. Singapore has 39 of these areas where the minimum plot is 15,000 square feet and the maximum site coverage is 35%. So the courtyard, not being part of the footprint, visually enlarges these houses. So as I was finding out why people were building courtyard houses today, I realized towards the end that they're also sometimes built by architects with a huge ego trip. I met one architect, who shall remain nameless, who said that he loved designing courtyard houses because they gave him control of everything he saw. His architecture in front, his landscape in the middle, and his architecture at the back. And perhaps, as I say in the book, that is the reason we will always have courtyard houses.
Thank you, Charmaine, for providing us a glimpse into your fascinating book. With this, we'd like to open the session for conversation. The conversation with Charmaine will be facilitated by our Design United bibliophiles from the South Asian region. They are young architects and design students from India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Welcome Eshana, Simran, Tejaswini, Anashwara, Huzefa, Shehrebanu, and Arpa to Reading Room. We've had a wonderful few days reading Charmaine's book in our reading group. And audience, we welcome your questions and we invite you to type your questions for Charmaine. Thank you.
Hi, Charmaine. It's so nice to have you today with us in the reading room. I'd like to open the discussion with a question for you. I'd like to know what were the houses that were closest to your heart that you visited. And I'd also like to know how you went about curating all of these houses, because there's, as we can see, a very diverse set across the Asian region. Thank you.
May I share my screen again to show you the houses that I particularly like?
Absolutely.
Now, I have to be diplomatic, but I am absolutely honest when I say that I love the houses on the front and the back of the book for different reasons. So this house that you're looking at now is on the back of the book, and it's a house by Andrew Matan, and it has a terrible location, I have to say. It's right next to a very busy road. But once you enter the house, you completely forget about the traffic. And the main reason you're able to do that is that courtyard and that magnificent moringa tree. I also really liked that Andrew Matan played with the Corbusian idea of the architectural promenade. So he choreographed movement around this house. When you go from level to level up those ramps, you always have a view of that courtyard and that incredible tree. And I liked also that Andrew Matan tried to make every floor of this house feel like the ground floor. So on the first floor, which is where all the bedrooms were, you come out of the rooms and you see what looks like a giant paddy field. It's actually just a very deep planter of lemongrass, and that was very effective. And then when you went up to the roof, again by ramp, you saw in the distance these mature trees, and on the edge of the roof, not railings, but a very reflective and shallow pond, really. So it really grounded you, and it was true. You felt like you were on the ground floor, whichever floor you were on. And then the house on the cover, and here it is. I have to admit, this house took a while for me to grow to love. And something that changed my mind was when I got home to Hong Kong several weeks after visiting the home, and I was listening to my interview with Sanjeev Punjabi, and the interview took place in that family room, which is flanked by two courtyards. And I was quite amazed because of the cacophony of birdsong. So there were bird noises just ricocheting from courtyard to courtyard, and really I could hardly hear myself think. Something else about that family room and that floor was that it was really comfortable to be in, and that was because of those courtyards. They were kept wet, so the evaporation really did help bring the temperature down. And I remember asking Sanjeev where the builders like to hang out, and as with the other houses, it was around these courtyards that they had their lunch. The other thing that I liked about this house was that when Sanjeev first went to the plot to see the structurally unsound old house, which had to come down, he said that it faced in the wrong direction towards the Mandalay hills, which were beautiful, but the house completely ignored these trees. Maybe it was built during a time when people didn't care about trees. But so he turned the house around to focus on about 50 different mature trees, laburnums and poincianas and huge mango trees. And he also wove the building around these trees. And what I liked was that when the old house came down, the rubble and the roof, they were all kept, and they are what you see on that lawn. So they created that mound, and I climbed over that mound to get to the first floor of the house, and it was just a very, very special feeling. So those were the two houses that I can honestly say I really love.
Thank you, Charmaine. That was lovely. We now move on to Huzefa.
Charmaine, it was lovely reading your book and going through all the beautiful projects that you've captured so well. My question to you would be that Courtyard Living looks at courtyards not only as a tangible typology, but also the presence of intangible elements. What are the challenges of translating and describing intangible elements of architecture, such as light and wind, into writing, such that the translation of one's personal experience of the reader.
You have to repeat that last sentence. You cut out.
I meant that such that the notion of personal experience gets translated and fuels the imagination of the reader.
There was one house that I really wanted to convey the sense of how it felt outside the house and inside the house. And that's a house in Alibag in India by SRDA. It's called Shadow House. And I tried to do that by describing the arrival sequence. So I didn't just start describing what the house felt like once I was in there, but I started from maybe a kilometer away when I was met with very dry, almost pancake dry landscape. And then as I got to the house, there were suddenly grasses that were doing this. And it was already a lovely feeling because you could sense that breath of air. And then once I went into the house, then there was the coolness. And I guess I described each step of that sequence, and that's how I got around it. And I also played with the idea of shadows and mystery. So I hope for that house anyway that I was able to convey the different feelings from things that moved, from very solid things like the walls in this house were very, very thick, and also the sense of mystery, as I said. I mean, sometimes it's, as you say, it's difficult to describe the intangible, and sometimes the intangible are things like the feng shui that goes behind the design of a house, or the Vastu Shastra that some owners and architects try to adhere to in designing a house. So you do describe the physical aspects, sometimes just the planting that goes into a house, like some plants do go with Vastu Shastra, such as the Tulsi plant. And in feng shui, you sometimes look at positions of doors and things like that.
All right, thank you. So speaking of houses and bringing a focus to one particular house, I wanted to ask you about Riparian House, which is by Architecture Group. It's set on the outskirts of Mumbai amidst wilderness, and there's this wide, expansive nature all around it. What qualities do you think the architect managed to contain within that courtyard if we wouldn't have been able to experience otherwise?
Riparian House was extraordinary because it was one of these subterranean houses. So at times you did feel as though you were buried. But when you were in the kitchen, which had its extraordinary courtyard built with limestone walls and with basalt boulders, I like the sense of being in the kitchen and seeing that and feeling submerged, but then you could see a little bit of sky and a little bit of a tree or two or grasses, and that allowed you to breathe a little. I think that's what you're talking about by mentioning that house. It did remind me also of some of the extraordinary houses in China called Yaodong, which are these cave houses, and similar kind of feeling that you have that I felt in Riparian House.
Thank you, Charmaine. Can you hear me properly from my end?
Very clearly.
That's great. Okay. So throughout the project, you have tried to make a clear difference between the terms of a courtyard and a garden. And you have said that a courtyard becomes a garden when its scale crosses the threshold of intimacy. Can you share us through your own personal reflections of examples that how did you start to feel this gradual change in the spatial quality?
I remember a house I went to in India that didn't make it into the book. And I have to say, it didn't make it into the book because it was vast and the courtyard was enormous. So it kind of lost its sense of courtyardness. I know that's not a word, but it lacked this sense of intimacy that you mentioned. Of course, it was enclosed on, I think, 3 sides, but it just lost something. And, courtyards, the dimension and the shape of courtyards, of course, matter a lot. And, when you have wide courtyards that are fairly shallow, you have courtyards that are sun collectors. And when you have courtyards that are narrow and quite deep, you have sun protectors. And you think about things like, the chimney effect of courtyards that work well. And in that one house in particular, I just didn't feel any of those things. I didn't feel a sense of enclosure. I didn't feel a sense of security. So that's why I didn't include it in the house. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it surely does. This own personal experience of feeling the change of the quality of spaces. And I think it really matters even during us as architects when we design too, because there's different kind of spaces which flow from one to the other can sometimes be a little difficult to play with when it comes to designing. And Courtyard has so much more to give in a personal level experience, I believe, from my own point of view. So thank you for sharing.
We have a question from the audience. Sorry about that. Are you able to hear me?
I can. Yes, I am.
Yeah. There's a question from the audience which says, given your experience drawn from writing the book and having seen all these houses in the book, what do you think as an outsider and someone who has built their own courtyard house is the most important quality of a courtyard house for the occupants, or does it really depend on the location, family, etc.? Also, what's the biggest negative of them? And finally, what are your thoughts on the building materials that work best for them, or does that depend solely on the local context?
Wait, there are 3 questions there. I should have taken notes. Okay, what was the first one?
The first one was about what is the most important quality of a courtyard house for the occupants, or does it depend on the location or family?
I can't talk for everyone, but for me, it's the freedom that comes from the sense of privacy. And I wanted an outdoor space that allowed me to feel private.
Yeah, the next part of that is, what is the biggest negative?
Oh gosh. They can be silly things like my aunt always asks me about mosquitoes, and I just roll my eyes and I don't even answer. I guess for myself, it was cost. A lot of glazing costs a lot of money. As you heard, the Australian house that I showed before, the husband was very worried about the amount of noise generated by his family because everyone was just screaming at each other from their own room. I mean, courtyard houses are quite space hungry. So I'm not sure whether that's a negative, but it's something that you do have to keep in mind if you want to build a courtyard house that works properly.
Yeah. There's also another question within the same thread that asks about building materials that you think that work best for courtyard houses.
Depends on where you are. I mean, I love that house on the front, the Gumati house, use Kota stone, which was apparently only available from Rajasthan. It's that blue-grey stone. And in a lot of the houses that I went to in Indonesia, they use local hardwoods. In Australia as well, local hardwoods. So, it just depends on the country that you're in and the area and what you can source. I mean, the stories I was hearing about the mafia in Arpa and the kinds of materials that are available, because you have to use what is available, and what is available sometimes is just what is local.
Sorry, I'm just having internet issues. But yeah, that's very thoughtful because it also contributes so much to being sustainable as a house itself, right? The that kind of materials.
Hi, thank you, Charmaine. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Hi. I'd like to ask one of the last questions from our audience. It says, I wonder on the physiological impact of living in a courtyard home. Would they ever truly be able to live in any other house typology?
You mean once you get used to having your own patch of the outdoors, can you ever go to living in a flat? I'll tell you in 10 years. I don't know. I mean, I hope that more people will gravitate towards living in places that have outdoor spaces, not necessarily courtyards. But, we are living in times of pandemic, quite unusual times. And I suppose those who have it won't easily give it up.
All right. I think we've already overshot time, so I would like to end with the last question. So, like you already mentioned, with the pandemic having engulfed us globally, it's forcing almost everyone to spend a lot of time indoors now. So, how, in your opinion, has this led to a rise in the popularity of courtyard houses?
Well, I don't know whether it will lead to a rise in the profile of courtyards and courtyard houses. I'm certainly talking about it more and writing about it. And I'm hoping that developers, in Hong Kong at least, will take notice. And I go back to this idea of, houses having wellness sort of design into them, and also houses that are humane. And I wonder sometimes whether, we need to have rules about this sort of thing. It just reminds me in 1901, the New York State Tenement Building Act required the building of courtyards in tenement buildings and required every room to have windows that faced out. I mean, all these things make a lot of sense, common sense. It's indisputable that, light and air are good for you. Being outdoors among greenery is good for you. So I guess all I can say is, outdoor spaces, we all deserve to have our own patch of space. And that should be a given, because courtyards, they give you light, air, privacy, security, and that's what we need.
Thank you, Charmaine, for inaugurating a reading room and for being our very first author and sharing your wonderful book and journey with us. We wish you the very best and the book as well. I would like to thank our moderators and the audience and Clayworks and DU team. I hope our audiences will get a copy of Charmaine's wonderful book. Have a good evening, and please join us next for our next reading room session next month. I would like to request DU team to please share the upcoming series of events. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chan, for your wonderful presentation today. Thanks to all our bibliophiles and the audience for an interesting and thought-provoking conversation. We'd like to extend our gratitude to Clayworks for supporting this webinar and all of our webinars. Thank you for being a part of Design United's first reading room installment. We have many more exciting speakers lined up, with designers from across the spectrum joining us to share their thoughts. Also, do follow us on our social media for upcoming conversations. Until next time, thank you, stay safe, and take care.